In daily life, I work, among other things, with the European Evangelical Alliance as a staff worker for Christian-Muslim relations. So, for the past 30 years, I have been involved in helping Christians to overcome Islamophobia and to develop a dialogue. So the topic of Islamophobia dialogue is very close to my heart. And I was preparing a lot more time, so I have written out my speech. And if I can't speak it, you'll be able to read it if you're interested afterwards. One of the things that I want to express is that I think the root of Islamophobia, in a sense, is the sin of exclusion. Miroslav Volf, who's a Croatian theologian, and has written quite a lot about this topic, and he gives 4 characteristics of what he calls the sin of exclusion. And he says, a culture of exclusion makes the other an enemy that must be pushed away and driven out of one's space. Secondly, exclusion considers the other a non-entity that can be disregarded and abandoned. Thirdly, exclusion fails to recognize the other as someone who is, in his or her otherness, belongs to the community of humankind. And fourthly, exclusion considers the other an inferior being who must either be assimilated or subjugated. I think in order to overcome Islamophobia, we need to develop another culture, another attitude, and other behavior. And I want to promote, to replace a culture of exclusion with one of embrace, and to replace an attitude of fear with one of grace. And I will explain a little bit more. I believe one of the ways to overcome Islamophobia is to develop a culture of embrace. Volf uses this metaphor, and he says, embrace means the absolute, indiscriminate, and strictly immutable will to give ourselves to others and welcome them, to readjust our identities to make space for them. And he gives 4 features of such a culture, which I will just mention. I don't have time to explain them more. 4 features, which he says is our repentance, forgiveness, which my colleague here also mentioned, making space for the other, and forgetting or overlooking the evil suffered. These, he believes, are part of a culture of embrace. But I think we not only need to replace a culture of fear with one of embrace, but also to replace an attitude of fear with one of grace. Fear is not just an emotion that happens to us, we do have control over it. Fear is a choice. Fear is something that we can regulate. Our human brain has the capacity to regulate fear and stress, and we need to acknowledge and confront it, and to replace it with, I would call, an attitude of grace. Oh man. Which I have, in order to remember the attitude of grace, 5 points, which all begin with one letter, which together make up the word grace. So it's easy to remember, an acronym. First of all, the GRACE stands for the growing awareness of the sovereignty of God. We need to develop this strong awareness, Christians and Muslims, that God is sovereign over the affairs of life and also the affairs of things that are concerned to us. It's His sovereignty that allows people to live in the same space together, and it is through His sovereignty that we can give space to one another. He wants to be our secure base. Secondly, we need to renew the grace of God in our own lives. We need a fresh renewal of God's grace in our lives. It's a prominent term, both for Christians and Muslims, and it's also one of the descriptors of God. I often use this definition of grace is undeserved mercy. It's often on the lips of our prayers, both for Muslims and Christians. And one of my friends has written a book called Grace for Muslims, ? And he defines what a grace response is. He says it's a willingness to alter the default mechanism of our brains, which causes us to fear the unfamiliar in another person, being prepared to give the others the benefit of the doubt, and make an effort to find out why they behave as they do. So growing awareness of the sovereignty of God, the renewal of the grace of God in our lives. The A stands for accept our own responsibilities in the matter. You do not blame, because we have not only Islamophobia, we speak of Westophobia. Both of us, both camps if you want, have to accept responsibility for our own fears and not keep the blame game going. C stands for contact real people through the dialogue of religion. Fear and prejudice are based on stereotypes. They depersonalize people, and we should act careful to ascribe to all others what only a minority of people do.
So what is C?
C is the C for contact real people through dialogue of religion. And dialogue helps to overcome these fear things.
Mr.
Both on regional base, there is a European Council of Religious Leaders. I'm involved in a local dialogue, so all kinds of dialogues. But the E stands for enter into the lives of others through the dialogue of life. So often I see dialogue just be led by leaders of the agencies or leaders of denominations or leaders of religions, instead of being at a grassroots level, which we call dialogue of praxis, or dia-practice if you want. One of the books that I read recently, I'm preparing a visit to Bosnia for 1 month, and one of the books that I read in preparation for this is called Religion as a Conversation Starter, and she writes there, encounters among the leaders of religious communities, however important they are,
Ruiter,
cannot bring sustainable peace.
It's not my fault, I swear.
I have 1 more minute left, sorry. Cannot bring sustainable peace until without systematic efforts of empower and to include the laity. Conclusion, 1 minute, 1 second, 2 seconds. In order for Europe to become free of Islamophobia and Westophobia and their related issues, what is needed are not mainly new laws against religious racism or persecution of those who change religions, less discrimination or more balanced representation of Muslims, and equal access of Muslims to education. The primary need is for people who want to be instruments of transformation, social agents who want to develop a culture of embrace and an attitude of grace, and who are willing to live in harmony with others, even those of other faiths. I hope that you will join me in this enterprise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ruiter.